I'm Don Greeley. I'm the director here at the Department of Water Management. A few just housekeeping rules as we go in the presentation. If you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for the mic to come to you. So you can, if you would please speak into the mic so the people that are online can hear the question. For those of you online, you can put your questions in the chat, and those questions will be asked during the presentation. So thank you. So with that being said, welcome again. We're here to talk about where we are with the Goose Creek and also to educate for the public. For those of you who weren't familiar with what's going on, we mailed letters to all the property owners within the Goose Creek Basin. Would like to first say, well, some people might have a question, where is the Goose Creek Basin? So it's basically what's shown here on the screen. To the east, it's Junction Road. To the south, you could say it's 147 where the railroad tracks are cutting through town. To the west, it's Gregson Street. And basically to the north, it's I-85. What's to the north of I-85 is mostly City of Durham parcels, as well as kind of the new distribution center. But those are kind of the boundaries of the Goose Creek Basin. I'll be talking or showing you in a little bit how we have an application that you can go to on the department's website that can show you if you have a question about where your parcel is, or if your parcel's in phase 1, phase 2. If you're on the edges, you could zoom in on that map and show you kind of where your parcel is. So I'll be talking a little bit about the regulatory requirements involved, a little bit about what is sewer capacity, and then talk about the improvements, some brief updates on how that's maybe impacting the development community, and then how to get updates as the project goes on. So, and as I said, at any time, just raise your hand if you have any questions. As far as regulatory requirements, everything that the city does related to the collection system or the wastewater treatment, or everything associated with drinking water, is covered under state statutes. It's also covered with EPA regulations. And a lot of specifically the wastewater collection system is covered by the state permit that the city has with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. So within that permit, it states that we have to operate the collection system in such a manner to ensure that we prevent any discharge out of the collection system onto land. The other thing it requires us is to plan for the future. So we have to adopt the capital improvement plan to fund reinvestment in our system. So, and we do this every year as part of when we set the rates for our ratepayers for the upcoming fiscal year. We adopt the capital improvement program for the year ahead, but also our planning is usually 10 to 20 years in advance. As part of those regulatory requirements, we're required to certify that there's adequate capacity within the collection system. So that means that wastewater coming out of a building or a structure can flow into the sewer lines and make its way all the way to the wastewater treatment plant without coming out of the pipes onto the ground. So, and we have to certify that that won't happen because we have capacity in our sewer lines. As far as sewer capacity evaluation, Durham has a pretty old system. Our system was built in the late 1880s by then the Durham Water Company. In 1902, Durham built the first wastewater treatment plant in North Carolina. And you can see that right close by here up on East Club. The structures that are on the south side of the road, some of those structures were part of the original plant in 1902. And when it was built way out of town because no one wanted to smell the treatment plant. But certainly now it's the city going to encompass the plant. As far as the overall collection system that the city maintains, we have over 1,300 miles of line throughout the whole city. Over 44,000 manholes, and we have 66 lift stations. The lift stations pump the wastewater from a low spot and pumps it over the hill so it can then flow by gravity to the treatment plant. So, and we have all ranges of sizes of different lift stations from small to large. The city started its sewer rehabilitation program formally in 1986. Initially, it was focused on any lines that were undersized or in poor condition. We mostly focused on the inner core of the city and then started working our way out from the inner core. Within the Goose Creek sewer basin, we were actually there in the late 1990s, early 2000s, TVing, cleaning, repairing, replacing all the lines that we saw within that area that needed to be addressed at that time. As far as how we looked at capacity back then, initially it was just based on lifting the manhole lid. We started putting flow monitors in. Soon thereafter, we started the program and have expanded our flow monitoring system, and we're continuing to expand our flow monitoring system. What that flow monitoring is we actually have a flow monitor in a manhole that's reading the flow in the wastewater 24/7 every day that we can use. We've also have built a computer simulation model of the whole collection system. We started that in the late 2010s. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, we have really focused on improving that model and adding and enhancing that model to where it is in the state that we have today. When we talk about sewer capacity, the capacity of the lines depends on really 4 factors: the size of the pipe, the slope, the smoothness, and then we use the computer model to determine the capacity. So when you look at a capacity, if you think of a pipe having 4 components for capacity, there's the everyday wastewater flow, and that ebbs and flows during the day. So to give you kind of an example of the size differential, right now our North Durham plant, which is right around the corner here, during the day it treats anywhere from 9 to 10 million gallons at a rate of 9 to 10 million gallons a day during the day. At night, that flow drops down to 3 million gallons or 2 million gallons. So during the day, when everybody gets up, we have a kind of 2 big spikes in flows in our collection system. One in the morning when everybody wakes up, takes showers, go to the bathroom, start cooking, starting their day. And then another spike when everybody comes home at night, and repeats that process. So we have what flows in the pipes on every day, every 365 days a year. And then we have the peak flows. As I said, we have a peak flow in the morning and we have a peak flow in the evening. And then we have peak flows when it rains. Unfortunately, rainwater gets in our system, and right now we would love to see it rain. We're kind of hoping it rains. Our wastewater plant operators don't want it to see it rain, but we would love to have it rain north of town because that's where our lakes are, so our drinking water supplies. But we have to have a certain amount of capacity in the lines for the peak and wet weather flows. As development occurs, they apply for permits and have flow. So as if an apartment complex is built, they might have a flow that's predicted to be around 300,000 gallons a day. We have to take that into account. Once it's built and constructed, then it turns into the base flow, but as long as it's still under construction and permitted, we have to take that into account. And whatever is left is the available capacity in the line. So, and currently what we have found is that in the Goose Creek Basin is between the wastewater base flow, the peak wet weather flow, and the approved permits flow, is that takes up the whole capacity of the pipe. So we don't have any capacity to add new flow to our system. If we did, there's a high probability that we would have a sanitary sewer overflow, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want wastewater to come out of the collection system onto the ground and into our streams. So, as far as the Goose Creek outfall improvements, because we determined that the sewer was at capacity, and we verified that by doing some field inspections. We looked at short-term solutions to see if we could do some quick improvements in the system, so we wouldn't have to issue the letter to industry that we did. But we couldn't really identify that. We also, as part of the project, identified portions of the pipe that are in poor condition. And we also realized that there's a lot of redevelopment and development going on in that area. But because we're at develop, we did issue a letter to industry in December. And what that letter said to industry was we were restricting growth within that sewer basin until we could make improvements. And those improvements were in two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is the lower section of the Goose Creek, shown in the upper box there. And then phase 2 is shown in the lower box there. Once phase 1 is complete, then everything that is in the purple, kind of the east third and the west third of the basin, development can start occurring once that's done. Once phase 2 is complete, then everything in that middle third development can occur and new flow can be added to the sewer line. Now we will construct phase 2 kind of north to south. So as sections of that line come online during construction, then flow would be allowed to come into that as we go. So, parts of the basin as we complete it will be coming online and open for development as it goes on. Any questions so far? Any questions online, Joe? Okay. All right. Right there. Paul.
So my question is this the only area in Durham that's at capacity?
That is correct.
Wow.
There's 2 other basins that are on our watch list, and we are moving forward with doing the engineering and the programming to upgrade those as well. But this was the more critical one, so it's out of the gate first. So then we had another question.
I would like to know if rainwater has a significant impact on the capacity and reaching capacity in the Goose Creek area.
Yes, that rainwater does impact the capacity calculations. We have to take that into account during wet weather, because we do have increased flows in our collection system during rain events. Once again, to give you an example, at the North Durham plant, if we have a heavy rain, once again, we're praying for some rain right now, but if we have a heavy rain for over a 24-hour period, our flow at that treatment plant is at 9 million gallons a day on average. The flow into the plant could spike up to 45 or 50 million gallons a day. So without all of that rain coming into the system, we have to take that into account to ensure that we have capacity, so that doesn't mix with the wastewater that's in the pipes and then come out of the pipes onto the ground.
When I was a child, I was born and raised here, so I won't tell you how old I am. But when I was a child, most of the streets were dirt streets, and there were ditches, and that was completely separate from the sewer system in the neighborhood that I lived in, that I still live in today. So I guess the root of my question is that since the ditches are now gone and the rainwater doesn't like flow into the creek, it flows basically into the sewer system instead. And it seems like that there's more rainwater than ever in
Right.
my area. Is that a key impact to the sewer capacity problem that we're facing?
Okay. Um, we do have a separate system. So even though we have more curb and gutter streets with the drainage collection, that is not mixed in with the wastewater collection system. We have separate systems. Okay, so it's not commingled, but we do have rainwater coming in, and as we endeavor to keep that rainwater out, but it does get into our system. So when you look at a manhole, in the street or whatever, you see the vented cover, the holes in there. So the rainwater does come into those holes. Those holes are to help vent some of the gases that build up in the sewer to prevent, because it's very corrosive gases, so it eats up the concrete in the manholes and some of the pipe materials that we have. But it also can cause an explosion if allowed to build up for a long period of time, depending on conditions. But that's very, very rare.
Don, when you're ready, we have a couple of online questions, so we'll do this one and some online.
Yeah, what is the negative economic impact that this is going to have on holding growth until you get this done? Is everything just on hold? Everybody that has permits, they need to kind of stop what they're doing?
If you can hold on to that question, I'll try to answer that because I have a slide.
Okay.
We'll talk about that.
And also, did this kind of catch the city of Durham by surprise based on the growth of the city or the population movement into this area, or is this sort of a normal operating procedure?
It caught us a little off guard, right? Because when we enhanced the computer model, we weren't expecting it to tell us that we were at capacity. It was telling us that we were nearing capacity in a couple different of the basins, but we weren't expecting it once we did the enhancements to the modeling that it was going to put us in that condition. So we are, as I mentioned to the earlier question, was that this the only basin that we had this? And I said, we have two other basins that we're trying to get out of. So we are endeavoring in all of our planning, and now that we have this model to really help us to stay way out in front so this doesn't happen again. And I'll answer those questions later on. So online.
Okay, we've got a couple questions. The first is from Steve Ducey. Is there a chance the sewer will become over capacity as phase 1 and the northern part of phase 2 go online to block development in the southern part of phase 2?
Okay. We don't, from our modeling, and the planning for that phase 1, once that comes online, we don't believe that'll cause any trouble.
Okay, second question. This is from Douglas Swisher. How close are we to reaching treatment facilities capacity?
Okay. Currently, our average daily flow at North Durham is anywhere between 9 and 10 million gallons a day. Fluctuates, and the South Durham water reclamation facility is roughly the same, around 9 million gallons a day. Both of those treatment plants are rated at 20 million gallons a day. So, and they can handle the spikes that I mentioned during the wet weather events. So we're about 50% capacity with our treatment plants. And we have been master planning those and have improvements to expand as needed in the future to accommodate future expansions at both of those treatment plants.
Okay, third question from Danielle H. I was told by a contractor that Cary previously had a sewer issue and they created a lottery system so people could still build at limited capacity while the city built the new system. Is Durham planning on doing anything like this? It's a huge oversight of the city that should have been expressed years ago as people brought property to build on it and are now being told they cannot.
Once again, thank you for that question. I will go into that a little bit more depth because it's similar to the question that was asked earlier that I asked, just for a little patience that I'll talk about that. But we're not stopping development completely, and I'll talk about why that is. There is development allowed to be moved forward under certain conditions. We've had contact by a number of developers, and a lot of projects are able to move through or partially move through, but I'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay, I have two more. This is from the Emmanuel Bible Institute. If a planned development involves taking down a structure to be replaced by a new structure of the same size and footprint, would this be prohibited?
No, but I'll be getting into that in a few slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Final question, kind of similar. What kind of construction is halted? Is it only large projects or also single-family homes?
Once again, I'll table that question for the development slides. If you would remind me, Joe, and I'll make sure I answer that question.
Will do. That's all we have online right now.
Okay. All right. So to help us expedite the construction of this project, we had two initiatives. This past fall, we went out, and because of our current load of our projects, we thought it was prudent for us to ensure that the project moves forward as quickly as possible. We went out and selected the design firm, the engineering consulting firm of HDR, and they're going to help us not only on this project, but the two other projects I mentioned earlier on the other basins, as well as a large water project as well. So we solicited those last fall, or went out for solicitation for services and selected HDR late last year. And earlier this year, we did the RF request for proposals for engineering for the design of the project, and we selected Kimley Horn. Kimley Horn was also a company that was in our on-call program. So we have 18 different construction and professional firms, or engineering firms and professional firms in our on-call program. So we were able to get them started doing the design work through the on-call program. And so that started a couple months ago. The formal contract to do the complete design was approved Monday night at City Council to do the design work. So that was approved by Council Monday night. Kimley Horn has a number of subcontractors that will be working with them on this project. Stewart will be doing the survey work. So you'll see trucks that says Stewart on the side out, and they'll be performing survey work on the project. Falcon Engineering will be doing geotechnical work. They'll be doing soil bores along the proposed construction line. Telex will be working with the easements that are needed on the project to help us with negotiations with property owners. And Vision NC will be out doing some of the closed circuit television inspection of the lines involved in the construction corridor. So we can actually see what's in those lines. So you'll see any of those firms with their trucks in the area.
How much is that contract?
It's the initial phase. It's $3.3 million. It's the first phase, so it's just for design. And then there'll be an amendment when we go for the construction services. The overall project itself is around $30 million, we anticipate. But wait for the mic. I broke my own rule here. Wait for the mic.
What will Telex be doing as far as
negotiating? What is their job?
They will, if we have to get additional easements, whether permanent or construction easements, then they'll be working with the city and the city's general services real estate division to help negotiate the purchase of those easements.
Will property owners have some type of representation when the easements are being negotiated? Or will there be an advocate for the property owners in easements when these easements are being negotiated?
Typically, we don't. If a homeowner wants to have representation, we can provide a list of that's something. It's a good question. We can probably provide a list of potential companies or firms that could provide those services if a homeowner wanted to do that.
Sorry, protocol. And the homeowner would have to pay for representation.
They would, but certainly that could be negotiated with the price.
Thank you. So this project, I think the number of people who've been dialed into this for the past 6 months have expressed a sense of urgency to getting a solution to it. And this, to me, looks like it's taken 6 months just to assemble the team. How do we get some momentum and speed and expedited process to this? And I'm sure the response may be this is an expedited process, but I mean, 6 months just to get the team together to then go do the work seems like we're a long way from getting this done.
Okay. Well, we have worked. Well, at the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to try to do to expedite it with working. So we have, talked to Kimley Horn. One of the reasons we selected Kimley Horn was they had the ability to, we believe, deliver on the project, and the team that they assembled to be able to ensure that what was ultimately negotiated would be no later than that. How we're looking to expedite that, as I mentioned, we've already started the work. A couple months ago with Kimley Horn, they got started a couple months ago. They completed all the aerial surveys on the project and are moving forward with that. We're going to be looking closely with construction phasing and as early as possible in the design process to identify where we might need easements so we can actually start discussions with the homeowners, impacted the property owners. Kimley Horn has already started the outreach to all the permitting agencies. A typical process usually has construction or engineering firms meeting with permitting agencies later in the construction process, maybe when you get 60 or 90% drawings complete, but we're engaged with them, ask them to engage with all of the regulatory agencies right away. We also will be looking at construction phasing, how we can break out parts of the job faster so we don't have to wait for all of the design to be complete. And that's especially important on phase 1. If you look at phase 1, which at the top of the screen in the map, you can see the Camden Avenue pump station. Well, that Camden Avenue pump station is actually on the North Durham wastewater treatment plant site. So phase one goes from North Durham down, crosses I-85, and then crosses 885. Most of phase one is either on City of Durham property or in DOT right-of-way, North Carolina Department of Transportation right-of-way. So there's actually very few property owners that we will have to deal with on phase one, because over 85% of the, about 95% of the project is either on City of Durham property or in North Carolina Department of Transportation right-of-way. As far as early out, we've asked Kimley Horn, because of the two interstate crossings, to get those identified location and elevation wise, so we could then release that as an early out construction project. So that, we think, will be a way of expediting one way of expediting the project, by having them start that work as soon as possible. And that would be an early out, it would be like a phase 1A. So we will look at, we've asked Kimley Horn to identify the project once they get the survey in and start looking at the design work. Are there other phases that could be bid out quicker, so we can start parts of the project as fast as possible and accelerate the schedule? And as I mentioned, in phase two, as we cross over I-885, we're more in an urban corridor. And, you know, another certainly a complication with the construction is that during construction, the contractor will have to deal with all the existing flow that's in the line itself that we're looking to upgrade. And we'll, depending on how and where the new lines are located, whether they'll have to set up temporary pumping to pump around sections of line that they have to build, or do tie-ins for the lines coming in from the side into the main line in. So they'll have to work through all of that. But we're going to ask Kimley Horn as soon as possible to start looking at construction phasing so we can get started to accelerate the project. As I mentioned earlier on phase two, they will start at the northern end, which is the downstream end, and build south. And as sections are built and put in service, then any lines that are tributary to that new segment can then be open for development. So as they move to the south, more and more of this basin will open up through that construction. The current schedule, design, you know, we expect to have the design for the whole project no later than September 27th. But as I mentioned earlier, we hope to have some earlier parts of phase one completed so we can kick those out as they've been identified. They've already started reaching out to the permitting agencies, and now that we have the aerial survey, they're starting to overlook at where easements are going to be needed, because they're just trying to get a sense of, okay, where the new line will have to be, and so we can get started early on that. So we anticipate bidding everything by next fall. But as I said, we hope to have parts of the project out earlier than that, and we hope to have the construction completed earlier than that as well. So, and phase two follows right behind that. Once again, we've asked Kimley Horn and their design team to look at how we can put early phases of the project out earlier in construction packages. We've also asked them to reach out to the construction utility content community to start talking to utility contractors to make them aware of the project, also to get their feedback on how the project could be phased so we can get the project done sooner.
So basically, we're looking at maybe a 2-year window for construction to be done or completed, or?
Well, from today, it's 2026 now, for phase two, 4 years
4 years? Okay.
for the whole project to be totally complete, right? But we hope to have, phase one done much sooner. And as parts of phase two come online, that will be done. But we're looking to expedite. This is worst case scenario that you see here, that we think we committed to, that it will be delivered within this time frame, absolutely. But we're endeavoring to accelerate that as best we can. And that was based on all the, until we have some of the actual design field work, it's hard to project a schedule until you actually have more information. So we'll be updating the schedule as we go along once we get into work with Kimley Horn and they get further in the design.
Will this easement be above ground? In other words, are you going to go under existing properties with your easement? Or do you need like a clear easement?
Currently, all the sewer is underground. So we'll be putting the line underground. There might be some sections that are aerial closer to the treatment plant. Some of those sections are currently above ground. But certainly through phase two, all of that will be underground.
Phase two seems much, much more complicated. Maybe you should do that first.
We can't, because the pipe, the phase one has to be there because it's going to be a much bigger pipe.
Then maybe the two phases should happen concurrently.
They're going to be overlapping as much as we can.
Okay. Is there a consultant who's leading this? You said HDR.
Kimley Horn
Okay.
is the design company, is the design firm that's doing the design. HDR is a project helping us manage Kimley Horn and keeping the project on track to help us with the capacity, because we have a number of other projects we're doing as well.
Right. And do they have timelines? In other words, like a roads contractor, they don't finish the job, they pay DOT $50,000 a day. Will these contractors be under the gun, if you will?
Yeah, we've already started talking to our attorney's office to put clauses in the contracts once we have them and incentivize them to work faster. So we've already started those discussions with our attorney's office about how we can incentivize the construction community to move faster once we have those contracts in place.
Great.
Don, I've got a couple online
Yep.
questions.
One more in the back and then we'll
Okay.
go online.
Okay.
So other than development issues, what other issues are we expected to see with water use or with our sewage systems until phase two is completed?
Could you repeat that, please? Sure.
Yes, so other than development issues, what other issues are we expected to see, if at all, with our water use, with our sewage systems, like everyday water use?
Thank you for that question. We don't anticipate there to be any concerns for a homeowner, that there's no issues on the water system. And the current owners within the basin that are currently there will continue to have the same level of service. Okay, we can go online, Joe.
Okay, we're up to a couple of questions now.
Okay.
First is from Sage G. If the city was approving the development in East Durham, how did this catch everyone by surprise if other parts of Durham were already being watched for being at capacity?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we had recently enhanced our modeling efforts to a greater degree. And during that modeling, during the initial modeling, we saw that there were areas that needed to be upgraded. But it didn't indicate that any lines were at capacity. The early report from that initial work showed that There were lines that were nearing capacity up through 2030, 2035. But when we enhanced the modeling to where we are today, it showed that Goose Creek was at capacity, which took us, we weren't anticipating that to happen. But we are, as I mentioned earlier, have identified two other areas that currently have capacity, but are certainly, moving towards a direction that they'll be at capacity in the 2030s. So we are moving those projects ahead.
Okay, next question from Thomas Hennessy. You mentioned that two other basins are on a watch list. At any point in the last 5 years, was Goose Creek on a capacity watch list?
No, it was not.
Okay,
Other than what was identified in the programming when the initial modeling effort was done, all of those three basins were put into the capital program starting in 2026.
okay, and then there's a follow-up from Thomas Hennessy. In the last meeting, there was a discussion about the subjective assumptions in your capacity model. Since the last meeting, was there any attempt to modify your inputs to identify capacity that is currently available for delayed development projects?
At this point, we have not identified any additional inputs at this time. Okay. Harmon up front, or Paul? Wait. Sorry.
I'm just curious, the $30 million that this is going to cost, was this a factor in why the Durham property taxes increased so dramatically over this past year?
No, the city, the water and the sewer fund, which is what the utility is inside of, is all paid for with ratepayer money. There's no general fund money associated with the operations of the utility. It's all self-funded. So there's no general fund participation here.
Going back to this, because I was here for that meeting when we talked about this new model and the coefficients going into it. Have they been looked at? I mean, is anyone studying, hey, if we put different coefficients in here, we get more favorable numbers? The other thing I would add is I've seen this slide of the schedule now 3 times. Is there a version of it, because this is supposedly the worst case, is there a version of it that says, hey, we think we have a shot at improving it to X?
I'll answer the last question first. Once Kimley Horn has an opportunity to get the information from the field surveys and take a look at that, we've asked them to get a revised schedule. That probably won't happen until later in the summer or in the fall, about what we think we can accelerate off of this. The first question, as I said, we continue to look at the model, but we feel that what we have right now is good, but we're continuing to evaluate that.
I have 2 more questions online.
Sure.
The first is from Tatiana Sherman. What are the other 2 areas that are being worked on? What are the other 2 basins?
Okay. The first basin is the Ellerby Creek Basin, and that basin basically runs from the North Durham treatment plant here directly westward on the north side of I-85, all the way up to Northgate Mall. The other basin is the Lick Creek Basin, which is further east of this area.
Okay, thank you. Last question I have right here, or right now, Logan Greer. Will this delay the East End Park redevelopment projects?
We are working with Durham, City of Durham Parks and Recreation about their projects. Currently, I believe that it's going to have minimal or no impact to their construction schedule. There are certain elements of what their schedule matching with our schedule. So I don't think don't anticipate there to be any issues.
That's the last question online right now.
As far as development impacts, and hopefully I'll answer your question. So what can move forward and what's been allowed to move forward? Currently, proposed developments with wastewater flow that have equal or less than existing flows for building or house reservations can move forward, right? So if you're renovating your house or tearing down a house that was mentioned earlier and putting back a similar size house, all of that can move forward. Prior to the city issuing the letter to industry, any project that had already had approved or permitted construction drawings or any approved building permits or currently building, all can move forward. So any projects that are on the edge of the basin that can divert their wastewater flow out of the basin can move forward. Projects whose timelines align with our construction schedule can move forward. But of course, they have to coordinate with the Department of Water Management. So currently, never seem to remember the numbers in my head. We have been contacted from 57 different developers about projects. Those 57 developers came forward with 104 projects. Out of the 104 projects, we've been able to evaluate 103 of them, and this number continues to grow as we're contacted. But out of the 103 projects that we evaluated, 32 all could move forward fully. 64 projects could move forward partially, and 7 could not move forward at this time. So, and when we say partially, I'll use the example because you're seeing it very commonly around Durham, is if a house, 5-bedroom house is torn down on a larger piece of land and the developer then wants to put in 4 or 5 smaller houses, as long as the bedroom count matches the house that's being torn down, the units could be constructed. So if they have proposed, let's say 5 units going in, and 2 of the units match the unit count of the house that's being torn down, then those 2 units can go forward right now. And then depending on whether we're in phase 1 or phase 2, the other 3 units could then go forward. So, and commercial properties, it's the same on commercial properties. We recently had a property that used to be a coffee shop that's now being turned into another commercial endeavor at an equal or lower flow, and that, of course, is being allowed to move forward. Did that answer your question? Okay.
John, I have one more online.
Sure.
This is from Eric Burkall. If I have land on Angier Avenue, which is on the edge of this basin, how can I divert the wastewater so I can develop the land?
Okay. Contact water management, and I'll show the, you can do it one of 2 ways. The first is put your inquiry to dwmdevelopmentinquiries.com. And then I have another email address coming up here in a minute that you can see. But you need to reach out to water management. To locate where your property might be, whether it's, if you're on the edge, are you in the basin or out of the basin? Or if you want to know if you're in phase 1 or phase 2, then you can go to the map that is at the Durham City or Department of Water Management website. On the front page, there's an icon for you to click. It takes you to the Goose Creek information page. And then in that page is also a map locator, which if you hit that QR code, that should take you directly to the map locator. And it will tell you, if you're in, like for right here, if you're in phase 1 or phase 2, or if you're in or outside the basin, if you're on the edge. So that'll help you determine what properties and where you are.
So I've had a request to go back. Is this a good time to go back and revisit questions that we said we're going to hold off until later, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, let's go ahead and do those.
Okay. So let's go back to this is the one about, I believe, about Cary. And is Durham planning on doing, I was told by a contractor that Cary previously had a sewer issue and created a lottery system so people could still build at limited capacity while the city built a new system. Is Durham planning on doing anything like this? It's a huge oversight of the city that should have been expressed years ago as people brought property to build on and it now being told they cannot.
Right. So if I understand the question, Cary had a lottery system, but they had limited capacity left. So they used a lottery system to allocate the remaining capacity. So, but because we don't have any capacity, we will not be doing that, but we will continue to work for ways of how we can, number one, accelerate the project, and number two, are there parts that we can build that would free up capacity?
Okay, and this is another repeat. If a planned development involves taking down a structure to be replaced by a new structure of the same size and footprint, would this be prohibited?
Yes, because that would fall under proposed developments with flow equal to or less than what's there existing. So that would be able to move forward.
But I want to clarify, the question was, would it be prohibited? It would not.
No, it would not be prohibited.
Not, okay,
yes.
Just clarifying there.
Yeah.
Okay, and what kind of construction is halted? Is it only large projects or also single family homes?
It's all projects, whether single family homes, commercial, industrial, institutional.
Unless they're in those categories, right?
Correct.
Okay. I think that's it.
Okay. For updates, as I mentioned, if you go to the Durham Water Management webpage, there'll be an icon on our webpage for Goose Creek Outfall info that you can click on at any time to find out the updates. That's the QR code that takes you to the water management page. If you want to learn about anything else about water management, you can go to that page as well. We have a lot of great information on the page and about the water system and the wastewater system. If you want to go directly to the Goose Creek Outfall Improvement Project page itself, then you can use this QR code and it will take you directly to the page for you to see updates. And if you want to be notified whenever there's an update is posted on the web page, you can sign up to be notified when there's updates on the page. And that's the QR code for that to be notified. If you signed up tonight, if you're in person and you've signed up and put your email address, we'll automatically put you on the notify list so that whenever we post, you'll immediately know that we posted something. Our intention is to post monthly with updates and any important updates in between the monthly update. So, and we will continue to, and then if you'd like to, information that we post that you'd like to see, please let us know as well. because we will endeavor to put the information that you want to see up on the website. As I mentioned, the projects that have come into water management at the meeting that we had last month for the development community, there was a request to be able to see what was allowed to be able to move forward. And we're just about finished with getting that list together. And by next week, that should be posted up on the webpage so you can see what projects were allowed to move forward, which projects were allowed to go partially forward, and which projects could not move forward. So, but we'd like to hear from you for what content we can add to the page as far as the project moves along.
Thank you. So in terms of updates and feedback to getting to people, I've met with the county regarding escalations in property taxes. And I shared with them this saga, and they were completely unaware of half of it, all of it really. And yet when they valued all of our properties, they valued them as if they had sewer capacity. Does the city have any guidance on how we might talk to the county about how that could be resolved? Because obviously two groups who are deeply involved in this are not talking to one another.
I would not venture on what guidance I could give you, John, because the property valuation is outside of our expertise. So, right. From the last meeting, it was, hey, could you reach out to the tax office to let them know? And we did that. Right now, what they take into account, that's the tax administration. I don't know how they value property, the formula, the methodology. That is outside my level of expertise. So,
kind of on that point, and I realize the complexity around this. This is the third meeting like this that I have attended, and several members of our group have attended, and it does feel like a lot of the information is repetitive and has not changed. I feel like I could take an exam now on the history of Durham sewer and may pass, which is helpful. When do you anticipate that we'll have a substantial new update, and what will that next step be in the process? I think to the points here, it is frustrating when we feel like this somewhat has been a siloed process, that we're hearing from this department, which we appreciate, but it's so intertwined with every other department within the city of Durham. We've heard council refer to it as a crisis, an emergency, and to me personally, it just does not feel like we're getting that level of care or attention at this point. So love to know when you anticipate a substantial update on progress here.
Sure. Certainly, three meetings. We had the council meeting to where we originally answered questions that some of you attended. The meeting last month was directed towards the development community to do a little deeper dive into how we got into the situation that we are at. The intent was, and the discussion was, hey, let's reach out to the greater community. And that's what the intent of this meeting is for. We mentioned that we do have to follow the state procurement rules as far as getting, professional services on hand. I think that once we have the Kimley Horn has the aerial survey work that they have, and they can start doing the design work, as I mentioned earlier, then they will have a much better sense and have some of those discussions with the regulatory agencies and contractors, that we should have a much better handle on kind of how this project's going to unfold and provide. And that, I think you'll start to see changes to what you see here.
Sorry, I had one follow-up. I remember in one of the previous meetings, there being discussion about the state and its, I believe they have to reaffirm the city's permit or ability to handle wastewater in this, in Durham. Worst case scenario, the state could step in, I think, and take over that part of the process. Could you update us on, or remind me on, when is the next, and I don't remember the proper term, recertification or approval from the state to allow Durham to continue to manage its wastewater services without help from the state government?
Currently, our collection system, and I don't remember the exact date, whether it's December or July. I think it's December of this year, our collection permit is due for renewal. We've already submitted all the information. So it's in DEQ's hands now to reissue the collection permit. And in the collection permit, it also talks about being self-permitted. So we don't believe that there'll be any changes to that. So, because we're in communication with them about, we were in communication with them about this project and the other projects and what we're doing. And they've given us the guidance that just keep doing that and move forward. But we are going to be revisiting them once we have a little further in the design. One of our intention is to go to DEQ to see if how we can potentially work with them to see if it would have any impact on the project and the timeline to open up development. But we need to be we feel that we need to be a little further along in that process to show them, for them to have a comfort level of where we are.
You had mentioned that your attorneys are working on the wording for these contracts with the consultants. How far along is that process? Because that could take a number of years.
We are working with them on the construction, which will happen next year. So we think we'll have that adequately in time for that, when those constructions. Not until we have the construction documents.
I had a question. So this is budget season as well, and I may be mistaken here, but I think I saw that there's a 14% increase in rates for water that's been proposed. What is that covering? What's driving that? And if I'm mistaken, correct me or dial me into what's happening with that whole component.
Okay. We have recommended, or to the city manager, and the manager has recommended to the city council that water and sewer rates increase 12% next year, and potentially further increases in the next 5 years. Over the next 5 years, we have been pointing at this window of time for 10 plus years. And over the next 5 years, we're seeking council to approve $2.7 billion worth of projects for the utility to ensure that the existing infrastructure is maintained and replaced. $1 billion of that $2.7 billion is a generational type project for the city of Durham, and that's the Jordan Lake project. We are building a new intake on the west side of Jordan Lake with a raw water pump station and pumping that water 17 miles back to Durham and building a new water treatment plant next to the South Durham Water Reclamation Facility, because we own land there, as well as a large transmission line taking from the plant all the way into downtown Durham to distribute the water. That project will allow the city of Durham to grow for the next 50 years. Lake Mickey was built in the 1930s. 50 years later, Lake Little River Reservoir was constructed in the 1980s. It just so happens that we're nearing, we need to bring the Jordan Lake project online to ensure that we have adequate water supply for the city of Durham to continue to grow for the next 50 years. So that's a huge part of that construction window. But we also have large projects that are replacing the infrastructure in downtown neighborhoods in the East Durham area and in the West End area. We have lots of projects at our wastewater treatment plants, replacing facilities. And then we have new regulations that we have to meet. The PFAS regulations that are upcoming, we will have to add PFAS treatment processes to our brown treatment plant. We hope to bring Tier Quarry online as also a water source. It was a rock quarry in northern Durham that we hope to bring online. So there's a whole host of projects, but it's driven by projects all across the utility. As well as all of these projects. You know, the Goose Creek, the Ellerby Creek, the Lick Creek.
With all the growth that's coming here to Durham, you know, with the population growth, you know, we getting, let's say it's about 60 people a day coming here, and probably more than that. But are we going to have enough? Are you guys going to build enough plants to suffice all the water for the people that's moving here, that's coming here? Are you going to have enough growth with this project?
Yes. That project is intended to take Durham out through 2070.
I understand that this is being funded by the water bills from individual citizens, and that this year there's a 12% recommendation. And we have some powerful contractors involved in this, and the possibility that they could say, well, we can't finish this project, or we've got to delay development until we get additional funding. What's to stop this project from becoming a 10% increase in water bills every year, or 12% every year?
Right.
Or what I used to call a Roddenhausen ripoff.
Good question. Currently, the Goose Creek project is fully funded. So we already have the funding for that. It's already been approved by the city council, and we already have the capital funds in place to be able to move that project forward. So a lot, because of, you know, 2.7 billion is a big number. That's paid similarly to like a mortgage. You know, we go out, borrow money, and have to pay it back as to the utility. And that's, once again, it's not mingled with the general fund. It's just you hear of a bond referendum, you know, for the city to raise money to do general fund projects. The city of Durham doesn't have to go through that process for the utility. We sell revenue bonds, and those are based on the revenue, the committed revenue that the city will generate to pay off the people that buy those bonds for investment purposes. But we have the funding in place. Yeah, we work closely with our finance department and our budget office. We have a 10-year rate model that we update every year with our capital spending to project all of this forward. You know, we have been having modest, much lower rates up to this point. But if we didn't have the Jordan Lake project, if we did have a lot of water capacity, you know, if we didn't have to do that project, we'd only be asking for a 7.5% rate increase. But that, we would only be asking for a 7.5 as opposed to a 12% increase. Because that's such a big project. It's $1 billion of work over the next 5 years. Could you wait for a mic?
Right. And it's based on revenue funding. So every time the water bills go up, then the revenue is going to go up, which means that we qualify for more funding, which means that the project is going to end up costing more, possibly.
Right.
And did you just say that it would have been 7.5 if we had not anticipated the shortfall kind of thing?
Right. So I just wanted to give you an order of magnitude of how much that project is impacting the rates going forward. As I said, the project is fully funded. And the other two projects, the Lick Creek and the Ellerby, the design money is already there to do the design work. We're asking for the construction funding for both of those projects in next fiscal year. The design, both of those projects, we've selected consultants. There's a different consultant on each project. And those contracts we anticipate to be awarded in the first council meeting after the summer break with City Council. So that first meeting in August, we expect those two design contracts to be awarded for those other two basins. So those can be moving forward as well.
I have two questions online. The first is from Amy Bose. Can you help me understand how the southwest area, Taylor-Alston area of the map is in phase 1 when it's the furthest from waste management site?
Okay. If you remember the map, the kind of the eastern, I call it thirds, the eastern third and the western third all have similar trunk outfall lines, like the phase 2 green line that was shown there. But those lines have capacity, but they in the lines themselves, but they can't handle any additional growth because phase 1 is at capacity. So once phase 1 is complete, then those lines flow into phase 1, but they don't have the capacity issues that the phase 2 area does.
Okay, thank you. One more from Thomas Hennessy. I understand that utility extension agreements must go to City Council to be ratified. Is it technically possible that members of City Council could decline to approve the utility extension agreements, or are these agreements approved as a matter of right?
The City Council has not indicated to us that they want to slow development in any way, shape, or form more than it is currently, so we don't anticipate there to be any concerns. We have discussed with the city manager's office and the city manager about having the manager be on a limited basis to be granted the authority to execute those extension agreements for certain types of projects, so they wouldn't have to go to council. And we'll be moving, hopefully, that forward to council for them to consider once the budget season's over.
Okay, I've got one more. This is from Tia. Between now and when the project is finally completed, what additional steps are being taken to mitigate any potential flooding, example, during hurricane season over the next few years, since the sewer lines are already at capacity now? Can we expect some sort of added support to avoid potential storm-related sewer overflow in the most vulnerable areas? If not, are there recommendations for homeowners to consider flood insurance in the impacted areas?
I'll break that into two parts. The first part is for heavy storms, for flooding with just stormwater that's on the ground. That is issues and concerns that should be raised to our stormwater program in the Engineering and Street Services Department. As far as the storm events that affect the sewer system, our intent is we have a watch list, a hotspot program, where we know there's accumulation of grease and rags in our collection system that build up that may restrict flow or potentially cause overflows. So those are cleaned on a much regular basis, sometimes quarterly, sometimes biannually. So we will be doing, and we know certain segments of this project where there's hydraulic limitations. So we'll be keeping them clean and free of any buildup to try to ensure that we don't have any sanitary sewer overflows. As far as future public meetings, we anticipate the next, there might be more, but currently right now, we'll do a phase one when the design is complete. But that will change as soon as we have identified if we're going to break the project up into different phases. We'll probably, when those start to be broken up, we'll have an earlier public meeting, similar to this tonight. And we'll probably have probably maybe a 30 or 60% design in phase two as well. But at a minimum, we'll be having public meetings in there. And I said, please, as I said, sign up on the sheet or sign up through the QR code for updates. At any given time, you can send questions to goosecreekinfo@durhamnc.gov, and we'll help answer your questions as well. And then that's also an email address to send if you have suggestions or about what content that we're posting on the website, if you think, how to enhance that to give you the information that you think you need.
I got one more. So if I demolished a house on my property last summer and my intention was to build a new home of the similar size and structure this summer, will that be allowed?
Yes,
Okay.
because that was taken into account because we used all the meter data to do the modeling.
Okay, thank you.
Don't be a capacity tonight.
Hope to be at capacity all weekend long. Other questions? I'll go back just so the email address is up there. So
Presently, we have no questions online.
all right. One and all, thank you for coming tonight. And as I said, we'll endeavor to update no later than once a month, and anything in between whenever there's significant information that we can post. But thank you for coming.